The following is a paid political announcement.
Lifelong Democrat Diana Florence served for 25 years as a Manhattan prosecutor under DA Robert Morgenthau. She put criminals away, stood up for victims, and protected our streets. Now, Diana is challenging failed Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg as an independent because it's time for a DA who fights for our families, not criminals. That's why Diana has won the support of organized labor like the steam fitters, plumbers, and ironworkers, everyday New Yorkers who want a DA they can trust. Manhattan needs a DA who will do the job, prosecute crime. That's Diana Florence. Under Alvin Bragg, crime is up and prosecutions are down. Bragg doesn't prosecute crime. He plays partisan politics. Bragg failed to protect women and failed to protect workers. As a prosecutor, Diana Florence won groundbreaking convictions, fighting against corruption, domestic violence, wage theft, and daily working conditions. She's always been a partner of unions, community groups, and to cops like us. For Manhattan District Attorney, vote for Diana Florence. Diana4DA.com. Paid for by Diana for Manhattan DA.
Netflix has a new, monstrous story to tell. In 1950s Wisconsin, Ed Gein lived quietly on a decaying farm, hiding a house of horrors so gruesome it would redefine the American nightmare. Driven by isolation, psychosis, and an all-consuming obsession with his mother, he committed crimes that would haunt Hollywood for decades. The third and most harrowing installment of Ryan Murphy and Ian Brennan's anthology series. Watch Monster, the Ed Gein story, streaming now only on Netflix.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
At 5 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Dr. Sky Experience as we speak with you, not at you, about the great mysteries of the universe to open our minds. We welcome each and every one of you as you move deeper into your weekend. And, of course, Monday, a celebratory day for Columbus Day 2025. All throughout the 2-hour conversation with great guests that you tell us and you provide us with also by sending me an email. Not all the guests that you recommend we obviously will get, but my email simply is here for questions and comments, etc. is DRSKY, Dr. Sky at WABCRadio.com. The contact number, we love dialogue with critical thinking, simply is this, 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222. And ladies and gentlemen, you can always go to the archival programs of the Dr. Sky Experience. And what about all the other great hosts 24/7 here on this great radio station, Talk Radio 77 WABC. You can do it two ways, WABCRadio.com, or equally important, RedAppleAudioNetworks.com. And I'd be remiss, that is, if I didn't thank our two helmsmen that navigate what we call the imaginary star out. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, not only around the nation, the world, but in our opinion, all the way out into the cosmos. And those helmsmen proudly are Tony and Bill, making sure that this signal sounds as good as you would expect. Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, Monday, a very special day, Columbus Day 2025. So stay tuned to WABC on Monday, Columbus Day, for live coverage of the Columbus Day Parade from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. with WABC personalities, with a tent outside the Apple Store on 5th Avenue, along with the WABC trolley, pizza and Zeppeli there too for all of you, ladies and gentlemen, that stop by early enough, celebrating Italian-American culture. President Trump, on the 9th of October, signed a proclamation in accordance with Columbus Day 2025, and it reads something like this, not to say it all. Born in Genoa, Italy in 1451, Columbus quickly emerged as a titan of the age of exploration. On August 3, 1492, following years of intense study, preparation, and petitioning, Christopher Columbus secured funding from the Spanish crown to set out on a daring expedition that most believed would be impossible, commissioned, as you may know, ladies and gentlemen, by Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Continuing on, the president says in his proclamation, in commemoration of Christopher Columbus's historic voyage, the Congress, by joint resolution of April the 30th, 1934, and modified in 1968 as amended, has requested the President to proclaim the second Monday of October each year as Columbus Day. President Trump says, and I continue to repeat this, he calls on all the people of the United States to observe this day with appropriate ceremonies and activities. Ladies and gentlemen, these 2 hours we're going to be going down to the coastal region of Brazil with a great author. His name is Lawrence Berggreen. And he's going to share with us not only the many books that he's written, but one in particular accordance with Columbus, Christopher Columbus, a navigator of the seas. This book, entitled Columbus, The Four Voyages, But who is our special guest, Lawrence Berg Green? He's an award-winning biographer, historian, and chronicler of exploration. His books have been translated into more than 25 languages. They include, as I mentioned, Columbus, The Four Voyages, a New York Times bestseller published by Viking in 2011. In 2007, Knopf published his Marco Polo from Venice to Xanadu. For this book, he crossed China from east to west and camped out on the steppe with a hospitable Mongolian group in their yurts. His best-selling Over the Edge of the World, Magellan's Terrifying Circumnavigation of the Globe, was published by William Morrow in 2003. And he is also responsible for so many other books. He has also published In Search of a Kingdom about Francis Drake's voyage of discovery. And how about this, ladies and gentlemen, apropos to the Dr. Sky experience, A Voyage to Mars, NASA's Search for Life Beyond Earth, published by Riverhead in 2000. It's a high honor to welcome author Lawrence Berg Green, who's listening to us and calling and speaking with you, ladies and gentlemen, from a beautiful coastal city in the nation of Brazil. And with that, we say good morning to Lawrence Berg Green. How are you this morning, sir?
Good morning, good morning. Bom dia, as they would say in Brazil, and thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure, sir. I know it's a long distance, but equally important, it's a very early time for you, but we have a lot of exploration to do. And keeping with the theme of exploration, just tell us about yourself.
Yes.
Where's your passion for these explorers? Where does that come from before we talk about Columbus?
I think it's, I'm not sure. I've been asked that before. It's always fascinated me ever since I was a kid. Space exploration, ocean exploration, mountains, it just fascinated me from all different directions. And when you write about exploration, it's often multidisciplinary. So you're combining people and science. And so the idea of a challenge, something that's impossible, of rolling back the, curtains of ignorance and superstition, the consequences sometimes tragic or painful of doing that. It's always interested me. And, when I start thinking about, that would be a good one, sure. There's so many fascinating explorers, some much better known than others.
Wow. His website, ladies and gentlemen, we'll mention it many times, is Lawrence Berg Green. Lawrence is Laurence, just so you know. Lawrence Berg Green, author.com. You have a new book, I guess, in the works coming out called what? Jules Verne and the Invention of the Future.
Yes, I've got one about Jules Verne, right, and the invention of the future. And I've been working on that now. I'm not sure what the exact publication date will be, but HarperCollins will eventually publish it.
Absolutely, Lawrence. If I may call you Lawrence, I appreciate that, and certainly the audience, I'm sure, has many, many questions. And again, ladies and gentlemen, I don't really want to go into the political side of the Columbus story. I mean, you're entitled to give your opinion here at 1-800-848-9222. But in the celebratory moment of explorers, that's really where we want to try to keep the conversation, because I think that's apropos. There's so much and so little time. But, Lawrence, I just want to mention to other people, your passion for exploration goes deeper. You're a graduate of Harvard University in 1972, and you've been a fellow of the Explorers Club for 20 years, a member of the Pan American Center, the Authors Guild, and the Board of Trustees of the New York Society Library. And proudly, he lives with his family in New York. So just like me, even though I'm not in New York right now, we are New Yorkers, right to our DNA core, right, Lawrence?
I think that's true. Yes, it goes back several generations. And but I'm in Brazil with my Brazilian in-laws for a while, and then we'll be returning to New York. Very reluctantly, because it's a wonderful time here in Brazil, and it's right. I'm right on the ocean here, and anyway.
No, that's fascinating.
We were talking.
I always like to ask people about the location that they're talking about, especially when it's not far away.
I see.
So right now, they're in that what? It's a little south of the equator, if I'm correct, or are you just near the equator, almost?
Near the equator, and Fortaleza is in a kind of a bump or a promontory of Brazil that protrudes out into the Atlantic. If you kept going, you'd eventually hit Portugal. So it's more or less a straight shot from here, and you can see for miles, literally, and it's beautiful. Now, because it's near the equator, we don't really have the dates. It's day and night are more or less the same length, so you don't have, long summer days or short winter days. It's almost the same all year round. And the weather is pretty much the same, except for, and you've heard this expression, the waters of March, which is the rainy season, which tends to come in March, but it can also be March, April, May, June. It depends.
Well, so, Lawrence, I'm here in Phoenix, Arizona, and the listeners in New York, they're also expecting a big low-pressure system to sweep into the New York metro area. Of course, much-needed rain, some say. Yeah. But here, Lawrence, we're going through something very weird. It's the non-love affair between Priscilla and Raymond, two of these storms that are now tropical, and they're moving up along the coast. Highly unusual for us to get the ex-relationships of both of these particular individuals, Priscilla and Raymond, where they're expecting a lot of bad rain as far as what could be bad about rain, but when it comes in floods, it's not a good thing. Absolutely.
Right.
Let's talk about this. Your book is fascinating, Columbus, The Four Voyages, 1492 to 1504. And ladies and gentlemen, you have questions about this amazing story in history. Always, the contact number is 1-800-848-9222, 1-800-848-9222. And, of course, many people out there are just ready to make that dial, and maybe we'll even get some, first-time callers, ladies and gentlemen. We love all our regular callers, but with the power of this signal, as you know, Lawrence. Let's talk about this. Here's something that's always intrigued me. I mean, from the astronomical side, we look at sky maps and now computers, but help me on this and the listeners. How did these people at this time even know the shapes of these continents? Because if you look at some of these maps, like if you look at Africa, the continent, in even these what we talk before the Renaissance, these age of exploration, how did they even know the shapes look fairly accurate? I'm baffled by this, and I'm sure so are people out there. How did they do that?
They didn't really know much, and it was a lot of guesswork, and a lot of their assumptions were really wrong. Columbus thought at his time, I think it was generally assumed that the Earth was round, or maybe pear-shaped, or something like that, but not flat, and but the size of the Earth was much smaller than people came to realize, and it was about half or even 1/3 of the actual size. That was one difference, and they were not aware of huge parts of the Earth. They were just, when I say they, I mean we're talking about in Genoa, Spain, Western Europe. They were not aware of much of the rest of the Earth and people and languages and cultures and they did get some. They benefited a lot from astronomy and mathematics that came from the East, and that was helpful, and they incorporated some of that. But in many ways, they were behind the rest of the world in some areas, and were trying to play catch-up. Genoa was part of this. That's where Columbus was from originally, and then Spain, and trying to build an empire. The Spain that Columbus encountered, we all know about Ferdinand and Isabella. This was the era of Ferdinand and Isabella, and trying to build, create a Spanish empire. It was also the era of the Spanish Inquisition, which we heard about, and that has a somewhat darker or sinister reputation, and that was based on trying to solidify the kingdom and also identify and push out outsiders who might be Muslim or they might be Jewish. And so many people simply hid their identity or left. This actually did not help Spain particularly, but that's the way it is. You maybe have heard, and I kept hearing about this as I was writing this book about Columbus. Wasn't he really Jewish? Wasn't he really Jewish?
Yes, I've heard this.
I heard this over and over, and the answer is maybe.
Maybe, right?
Maybe. Nobody really knows. His father and grandparents were weavers, and they were, Italian. So beyond several generations back, we don't really know about it, and it's hard to say. It's a possibility. We really can't rule it out. Anyway, he identified strongly as Catholic. He was devout. There's no question about it. And I would say that's one big difference about the explorers of then and now, is that they were often driven by a powerful sense of faith. That was part of it. The other powerful sense was conquest and greed. And but basically they were saying often they went because they had a mission to go. Ferdinand and Isabella were dispatching them, and they felt it was their God-given mission. It was also a different era. I think the mentality was different. Columbus often said he heard the voice of God speaking to him, and I mean amazing. Literally.
Yes, amazing.
And a lot of people say, they're praying they hear God, et cetera, et cetera. But I think in Columbus's era, people really heard the voice of God speaking. And Columbus was one of those people. So we would think, that's kind of unusual, that's kind of weird. Not in Columbus's time. That powerful. Was not weird.
Very powerful.
And people around him did not think that he was, extra super duper religious. He was, more or less in the mainstream. And that was one of his guiding forces, maybe the most powerful one.
Lawrence, I wanted to ask you this as we move through this interview. I wanted to ask you this. This is fascinating. So young Columbus, I'm reading from not only your book, but other scholars, trying to put it all in compilation. Yes. That is it true that Columbus had an advantage in the sense that he also had experience on the ocean, maybe before some others, but more importantly, this is my question to you, is it true that he had experiences with the cartographers who are also in his family, the map makers of the day? That would be a big advantage. Is there some truth to that part of it, too, that I'm reading?
The map makers, I don't know about. It's possible, and that would certainly be an advantage, except a lot of these maps were dead wrong, and they could mislead you terribly. So the maps the most valuable maps were the so-called Portolan charts, that were compiled by people who were actually sailing along the coast somewhere or across bodies of water, and that was done from direct observation. Others who were deriving it from biblical sources or hearsay or ancient texts, as you can imagine, were not that accurate or useful for navigational purposes. Yes. So the map making was evolving as Columbus was going. Keep in mind that people say as offhandedly, he discovered America. He never knew America existed. He never got there. Right. Even on his 4 voyages, he got to Jamaica, he got to other various islands, but he did not get to America. And I think if he ever came back to America today, or even 100 years afterward, he would have been astounded by the prevalence of his name everywhere, all over the place, because, it was a place that he didn't exist. So some of the ironies here are really staggering.
It is amazing, and especially in Ohio, with a city named after him, not to be on the lighter side, but so many names, of course, respecting Christopher Columbus. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us on the Dr. Sky Experience, first of all, thank you for being part of our excursion. As we normally talk, if you're a first-time listener, about the great mysteries of the universe and also bring it down closer to home, astronomy, space, aviation, weather, celebrity guests, and you bet, stories of American exceptionalism blended into a program, Lawrence, that we call the Dr. Sky Experience. If you'd like to get in on the conversation, maybe you have some questions for our esteemed author, Lawrence Bergreen. He's an author of so many books. The one we're concentrating on primarily is Christopher Columbus as the Explorer, the book entitled Columbus, The 4 Voyages, 1492 to 1504. That's amazing. And before we go to the break in about 5 or 6 minutes, I just wanted to ask you straight up, because it's a fascinating story. How does he go ahead and do the convincing, the selling side of his missions to the hierarchy of Spain, to get what he wants? I mean, you'd have to be a pretty good salesperson, I imagine, with a lot of evidence. Yes. They just weren't going to shell out money to just anybody. So tell us how that happened in the simplest way.
Well, keep in mind there were 4 voyages, and he did have a lot of, he was very persuasive. He also brought some state-of-the-art navigators along, and he convinced the Spanish monarchy that a lot of it was what we call fear of missing out. If they didn't do this, others would steal a march on them, and they would not be the first. Keep in mind some of the ironies here. When Columbus did get to the New World, it had already been, it was already teeming with people, but they had been there for centuries and gotten there ahead of him. And, we hear stories that are not documented, but hearsay that there were other explorers who had come from Norway and other places ahead of him. So Columbus was hardly the first, but he, in some ways, because he did it 4 times and because he made a point of advertising and talking about it and writing about it, became the best known of these explorers. And also, if we go on, we have a kind of at least I do, a complicated vision of Columbus. There's the somewhat simple idealistic version that we hear about when we were younger. Then there's a sense of correction that it's, he was actually exploiting people whom he encountered, and this religious, sense was a cover for sheer greed. Then there was a push for Indigenous Peoples Day, which has peaked during the Biden years, but I still think goes on, and I think will remain for a long time. And so now, as times change, and from that Trump comment that you made by President Trump, we want to, we see it as an emphasis on getting back to fundamentals. This was Columbus and the man, and this is what he did, and, this is why it matters. But as I said, like a lot of stories, there are so many layers to peel away.
It's incredible, ladies and gentlemen. We're concentrating on the book tonight, and this morning with Lawrence Burr Green, of course, entitled Columbus, The Four Voyages, 1492 to 1504. But if I may take the liberty just before we go to the hard break, you're the author of so many other explorer books, like In Search of a Kingdom, Francis Drake, that's a story. Then we talk about Marco Polo, Magellan, that's another one, a circumnavigator of the globe, Voyage to Mars, one that I'm very much enamored by with your knowledge of the planet and some things we can talk about. And then on a lighter subject for many, maybe it's not so light, but let's bring love into the equation, right, Lawrence? Casanova, the world of a seductive genius. Wow. I mean, you really, how do you have any free time? And for those of you that like stories of murder mysteries and criminal syndicates, Capone, the man in the era. Wow. What's next other than the book that we talked about, Jules Verne and the Invention of the Future? That's pretty cool.
After Jules Verne, I'm not sure. I'm just, when I finish a book, I'm just trying to get to the end of it, and it's hard for me to, see beyond it. I have other ideas, but you never really know what's actually going to take shape, and, there's a lot that don't work out. Excuse me. True. And a few that do, and some that seem to make sense, and others that don't. I was wary about Columbus because there is a room full of books about him and some aspect of him, and I was wondering, what can I possibly add to the conversation, the record about Columbus that would be useful?
That's amazing, because these people are not alive today, and you have to do as deep research as you can based on what? Other people's interpretations of history, and maybe some actual literal writings that need to be translated. And and not you, but what if somebody gets the translation wrong? You see, there's also options there to say that yes may have been no, because they wrote in a different style, right? In those days, maybe they had a different meaning.
Those are all great points. And, for me, the basic thing is primary sources, no matter what the language, whether it's English, Spanish, Latin, French, you name it. And then you're right, translation is really important, getting an accurate translation. What does that really mean? Pointing out where, the words could be ambiguous. So one does the best one can. But I think it is important to go back to the primary sources. We're lucky that Columbus wrote a lot about his own experiences, and he didn't hold back. He complained. He was a world-class complainer. So he had a lot to complain about. So he unburdens himself on paper and writes about it, which is helpful. You had mentioned Marco Polo in passing. Marco Polo actually didn't write a word. He dictated it all. Years later, when he got back to Venice. So, but that's a really different kind of exploration.
Well, Lawrence, I hate to cut you short. We're at that hard break, as they call it, as you know, in the media world. But so much more, ladies and gentlemen, with our special guest, Lawrence Bergreen, his book on Columbus. We're talking about the explorer, the navigation of the 4 voyages, and you, ladies and gentlemen, with 1-800-848-9222. The phone lines are lighting up, Lawrence, right now. And then when we come back, let's have a conversation about how let's start off with the first voyage, how Columbus may have known something about the winds and the design of his ships to help them glide over the ocean. Lawrence Bergreen, of course, is spending his morning with us, calling us from the beautiful coastal area of Brazil. And believe me, Lawrence, I appreciate you being up with us. It's an early morning for you, as it is many. We'll be right back here on the Dr. Sky Experience.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
By prevailing over all obstacles and distractions, one may unfailingly arrive at his chosen goal or final destination. A quote from Christopher Columbus. As we celebrate the journeys, The Navigator, a book by our special guest, Lawrence Bergreen, calling us from a beautiful coastal city in Brazil on this early Saturday morning, ladies and gentlemen, or wherever you're listening to us around the nation. We certainly appreciate you as being part of the Dr. Sky Experience. Lawrence, let's go to the phone calls because there's many, and I'm sure they have lots of things they're inquiring about. Let's say good morning to George in Manhattan. Good morning, George. You're on with Lawrence Bergreen. How you doing today?
Gentlemen, outstanding show. And I like to first tell the people the 3 men most responsible for Western civilization. Christopher Columbus, he discovered the Western Hemisphere. George Washington did the unbelievable of shaking off an empire and turning down the kingdom. And Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, who in the 8th century stopped the Islamic invasion of Europe. Folks, without them, who knows where we'd be. Now, I'd just like to say something. Christopher Columbus, unbelievable navigator. The man was a genius. We know other people, they say they were here, but Columbus documented what he did, and he was unbelievable in getting to where he had to go. And he had, you said, like Mac Maples, these guys had insight, intuition inside them that no other people had of their day, and that's what made them great. But I'd like to just say something and make a comparison.
Yes, go ahead.
We have in New York City, we have a subway system, and we have a Christopher Columbus of the subway system, and that's Curtis Lewa. But Columbus knew what safety matters were. In New York City subway system, they're locking the train doors. If there's an emergency, people can't get out. Why are they doing this, and why isn't Curtis all over this like a pit bull in a meat locker? That's why. Any follow-ups, gentlemen?
That's okay, George. You're full of energy, and I appreciate the historical comments. Lawrence, hopefully you heard what George was asking or commenting about.
Well, I think one thing that George was getting at was the sense that Columbus had an incredible amount of courage. Really extraordinary. I mean, you're heading out across the Atlantic. You don't really know how far you're going to have to go. You're with 3 tiny ships. They have only a couple of dozen men aboard each one. You're at the mercy of the men, of the weather, of food, of all sorts of unknown things, and it just requires a heck of a lot of guts. And there was also a big loss of life. Nowadays, if something like this happens and somebody dies or is injured, there's insurance, there's this, there's that. It's a scandal. In Columbus's day, people were willing to lose their lives in pursuit of this goal, not because they were martyrs, but because they had no other choice. Often these sailors were prisoners. Or almost prisoners.
I didn't know that. And, that's interesting.
Yeah, had no other option. Columbus, of course, was not, but many of the sailors there were there because they had no other option. So life was tough, and I say that with a capital T, and they were really courageous.
George, a quick response from you, not to cut Lawrence off, but we have a full board of callers here for an exceptional topic about Columbus and a great guest. George, if you're with us, your final comment on this?
That's what makes your show great, when you give the caller a rebuttal. Okay, I know Italian Americans celebrate this day, but this is really the celebration of Christopher Columbus discovering the Western Hemisphere. Everybody should be thrilled about today and party and ignore the namesayers, because if it wasn't for Christopher Columbus, with my family background, I'd be in London today with all those lunatics.
Well, we appreciate you and giving us your commentary, and thank you for letting me offer the opportunity for rebuttals here. In many cases, it's difficult when we have a caller board that's that full. But, George, good morning to you and a celebration of Columbus Day, especially to our Italian-American friends and everyone who obviously wants to talk about a celebration of explorers. Thank you, George. Let's say good morning to Tommy in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Good morning to you. You're on with Lawrence Bergreen. How are you doing?
Good morning. Thank you so much. I'm Macedonian Greek, and I love Alexander, and I think that Christopher Columbus was with the Templars, and which is Freemasons today, and they have a lot of knowledge from Alexandria, because all the knowledge of the world was kept in Alexandria by Alexander the Great, and the Greeks already knew that the world was round. And I'm in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I'm a truck driver. Check this out. During the pandemic or during this time, they took off a big statue of Christopher Columbus from Seaside Park, and they made a small one in Brinsley Park where nobody can see it. When there was that movement to take Christopher Columbus, what a shame, Where do these people get to do that?
Yeah, Tommy, we appreciate your passion. You bring up something good. And, Lawrence, this is interesting. I've studied this, but I'm sure you have a much deeper knowledge of this. The great library in Alexandria, unfortunately, when it had the fire, we lost a lot of these texts, but Tommy in Bridgeport is correct. This goes back a long time with the studies, of astronomy and all the different things of knowledge, the Greeks, the Egyptians, and so many great cultures. Talk about that, Lawrence.
Yes. In the Renaissance and then the Age of Discovery, a lot of this lost knowledge, as you put it, had to be rediscovered. Because it had been lost, or there were rumors of it, or there were copies of books. Some of it was dated or not valid, but a lot of it was gone and then had to be rediscovered. This happens over and over again in history. By way of analogy, when Marco Polo returned from his 20 years in China, he brought back remarkable inventions that Venice could have profited by instantly, and they were almost all ignored or discarded for a couple of hundred years, and then they were invented separately and independently there, not because he brought them back, but because the time wasn't right. And so often these inventions or discoveries or books arise out of a particular culture. And if the culture isn't, is different, it doesn't arise. Now with the internet and communication and translation, it's different. So there are opportunities to do that, but it's still often baffling and overwhelming to people to try and comprehend different ways of thinking, it's very challenging.
That's why it's so amazing when we talk about what you're writing about from the scholarly side about these explorers. This is amazing, and I still am baffled by this. You're answering my questions, and obviously looking at how they navigated the great books. So, Tommy in Bridgeport, I appreciate you bringing up Alexandria, because that's where a lot of the root of knowledge was stored. And what a shame, right, Tommy, the loss of that library, and we still have some stuff. Imagine what we'd see if we didn't have a fire. So, Tommy in Bridgeport, thanks for being with us. You brought up a good point. Continuing on as we move through time and space on the Dr. Sky Experience. Good morning to Max in Manhattan. You're on, of course, with Lawrence Bergreen. How are you this morning? Hope you're well.
Thank you, Dr. Sky and Lawrence, for taking my call. Now, from what I've seen, was the father-in-law of Columbus, who was a Portuguese Mason, who was a navigator, and a good deal of the maps came from him. Lawrence, you also mentioned about the kicking out of the Muslims in Spain. Now, remember, it was about the year 800 when the Muslims conquered Spain and stayed there for about 800 years until the Christians finally kicked them out. It was a long battle until 1492. So it's not like, they just weren't being nice to the Muslims. They were overtaken by them and finally kicked them out in 1492.
Interesting.
One more thing, if I may.
Please.
Indigenous Peoples Day. I would suggest that on Columbus Day in Latin America or in Mexico, no one is complaining and calling it Indigenous Peoples Day. They're calling it Christopher Columbus Day. So it's only here in the U.S. where people begin to rebel.
Interesting. Well, you bring up some good points there. And I don't know. It's interesting, Lawrence, about, there's this big conflict there seems to be, or maybe there really isn't a conflict with Indigenous Peoples Day. I mean, they have a right to have a day if they choose, but our concentration is on the exploration side of what these people did. And let's not forget that many of the indigenous people also wrote about some great things in science and technology. But how do you respond back to Max? I think he was bringing up some good points.
Well, Max, what's exactly your question? Could you just sharpen it up to a point so I get it?
Well, I don't know. They were part questions, part statements.
Right, statements.
When you made the statement about Islam, it made it look like the Spanish were just evil people kicking the Muslims out in 1492 without any prior foreground to that history.
Oh no, that was well. I think the Spanish Inquisition, was not considered as a great development, and it lasted until the middle of the 19th century. I think it was in effect until 1843, incredibly enough. So it did serve a purpose, though, because it solidified Spain in a way that it hadn't been before. Without a Spanish Inquisition, the age of exploration, and therefore the United States, would have been very different. So often these forces have cut a different number of ways, and they have effects that we now see, many years later, centuries later, as being good or bad. And but anyway, I try not to make a judgment about it when I'm writing about it. Subjectively, if I'm writing about Columbus or Marco Polo or Magellan, I'm working from primary sources, and in my mind, I'm right there with them, and I'm not really thinking about, how is this going to look in 2025? I'm trying to see it and feel it to the extent that I can through their eyes, through their minds, and see it their way.
Interesting. Max in Manhattan, I wish we had more time, not to cut you short. Your points are well made here. Obviously, we like to have this particular show where people, of course, call in with their feelings and express their concerns in the form of dialogue, as we like critical thinking. And thank you for being part of that, Max. We're up against another break, ladies and gentlemen. When we come back from this particular break, I'd like to get in, with Lawrence's permission, the actual ways that Christopher Columbus did navigate and his amazing way of going across the oceans. This is something interesting. It sounds more like science fiction to some, but no, right, Lawrence? This man knew something about the oceans. We'll get into that and so much more when we come back. Our very special guest, Lawrence Bergreen. We're concentrating on one of his many great books, Columbus, The Four Voyages, 1492 to 1504. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're still looking at Melvin in the Bronx and many others at 1-800-848-9222. We will be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
America got its charts from Columbus. A quote from the great poet Ralph Waldo Emerson. 47 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue with our special guest, Lawrence Bergreen, his book on Columbus's Four Voyages. Let's say good morning to Melvin. He's been patient in the Bronx. Good morning. How are you today? Your comment or question?
Christopher Columbus never made to the mainland. He also wrote a journal which is on display in museums. In that journal, he wrote, "We have met the natives. They are peaceful. We must teach them our ways and make them work for us." He also wrote in that journal, "We're able to communicate with the natives. They tell us about the Africans they trade with. We see their ships and the records of their ships along the coastline, but we can never catch up to it." Also, Christopher Columbus was one of the captain a slave ship after the proclamation that King Ferdinand issued in 1501 that every African taken to Africa was to be brought out and changed, educated in Christianity, and taught the language to the masses. Yeah, he inaugurated slavery in this hemisphere. Christopher Columbus.
There you go, Melvin. Well, Lawrence, response back. I mean, it's interesting. Nothing's perfect in history, and nobody should, discount the fact that there's nothing perfect going on in some of these voyages. I know from historical side, but you have the floor on this because there are people who have concerns. How do you address that?
Well, I'll tell you what I think, and not everybody will agree, and your caller may have a different point of view. But the way it seemed to me from reading what Columbus wrote was that he went there to what we now call the New World, and encountered various people, and some the Taino and others. At first, he was very impressed by them, and then as time went on, he became more uncomfortable. Of course, they were not Christian, and his plan was to convert them. Some of them willingly converted to Christianity, others not so much. Some, after he left, it quickly fell away. It didn't take, but in other places it did take. And so that was very interesting. And the second thing was, as I mentioned, there was another side. As he watched them, he said, that would be a useful supply of free labor if they could become, we'll call them indentured servants instead of slaves, but in effect slaves. Was he a slaver in the sense of the ships were too small to carry a significant number of people, and the rate of mortality was huge, so they really couldn't function that way. But he did think that was a possibility, and that was not unique to Columbus. That was what was going on in Europe at that time. So it took a long time for the notion of slavery or indentured servitude to fall away. And as I said, Columbus was brilliant. He was courageous, but he was also very much a product of his times. And that would be late medieval, early Renaissance times.
Interesting. Melvin, thank you for your commentary and your concerns. Obviously, we have opportunities out there for everybody to express their opinions. And continuing on, ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue in hour number 2 with Lawrence Berg-Green on this particular subject of Columbus the Navigator and the Explorer. Your calls welcome at 1-800-848-9222. And the reason I was trying to move fast forward, Lawrence, is I want to get to the point here that I find so fascinating. Columbus sails, as you know best from the historical side, he does not go directly from the home port straight across the ocean. He goes down to the Canary Islands. Now, this is fascinating. I don't want to take the energy from you, but he goes there, and from what I'm reading in your book, to resupply, but he knows something different. Tell us about this, because I'm amazed at how he could navigate knowing things about the different winds and the ocean currents. This is great stuff.
Well, he knows about the ocean currents, partly because he was a quick learner, and he realized this could help. Partly he he saw what was happening with birds and how they were going, and he learned from them. And he could also tell from the waves how that was going, how they looked, and he followed that. He was a very good seat-of-the-pants sailor. Keep in mind, he didn't even have a telescope. The telescope hadn't been invented. That would not come until the next century. So he was doing all of this by the naked eye. He also used the sextant, which could be helpful in telling the distance or the angles between the sky, the sea, the land, etc. So he was adept with that, and he had a navigator with him, who was helpful on the ships. But a lot of it was what we would call seat-of-the-pants sailing. Columbus was almost blind by the end of his life, and the reason why was
I didn't know that. Yeah,
so many hours looking at the sun or at the brilliant sky or water, and went almost blind in the process. So by the time, at the end of his fourth voyage, when he staggered home to Spain, well, it was a home port. He could barely see. He was half dead, and he was almost too weak to move. He was broken, and his body was broken, and it was really extraordinary. But his idea of navigation, by our standards, was really primitive. Even 50 or 100 years later, it was much more sophisticated. But just keep in mind, he didn't even have a telescope.
That is incredible. And you're talking right, because the telescope, from studying astronomical events, not to split hairs, around 1608, Galileo uses it in 1610.
Yes.
You're right.
Yes.
So they had to do this all by naked eye visible objects, looking at stars. Yes. They probably didn't even have good star charts. But what's so fascinating about this, Lawrence, as you're talking about this, describe the ships. I mean, the Santa Maria, we're talking about a ship that's probably not longer than 60 feet, if I'm correct in this assessment. These are small vessels.
The Santa Maria, that was the big one, and I think that would hold 50 people, or a little bit more. And it was so big that it really couldn't even get close to shore, and had a fairly, deep draft. The other two, the Pinta and the Santa Maria, again, this is the first voyage, were much smaller. They were more adept, agile on the water. They were all rather slow. It was hard to estimate their speed, but maybe 10 knots an hour max, which meant that their progress was slow. Also, the sails were interesting because they were hybrids. They were basically had a combination of straight sails and then sails that were Arab-style sails that made them much more maneuverable. So, without that, they would not have been able to, navigate around the islands. And these were called caravels. So the caravels were the Lamborghinis of the ships of exploration of those days. Yes. And because they were fast and they were maneuverable, they weren't necessarily super practical. So the ships that he had were more or less state-of-the-art, and that made a big difference.
Well, your explanation goes deeper here, and I'm just reading this for everybody. Columbus, with 3 little deep-bellied, rudder-steered ships carrying bulging canvas sails and a novel idea, departed Spain near Gibraltar, sailed south along the prevailing winds. Riding those winds, his naturally convex cloth sails not only pushed his tiny vessels along, but by virtue of their shape, they also provided lift in the direction of travel, as if there were wings configured to pull horizontally instead of vertically. Knowledge of such aerodynamics had not been advanced at that point in science, so obviously Columbus and your scholarly work tell us about this amazing man. And again, from the beginning of this interview, Lawrence, you were talking about inspiration from God. That's a powerful statement right there. Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
Imagine that.
I think, as I mentioned, he was certainly a man of faith, and that was not that was not unusual, but I think it was particularly strong in his case. And he writes about hearing God talk to him when he was in the middle of a storm or at other times. So it was constantly in the background. This wasn't just a way to ingratiate himself with Ferdinand and particularly Isabella, who was very, very observant. It really was, part of his makeup. And if he hadn't been a man of faith, if he had no faith, he wouldn't have done this. I don't think we would have known or heard about Columbus.
Well, Lawrence, I really appreciate you, because going into hour number 2, there's so much to talk about. And ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to get in on this conversation, the Dr. Sky Experience gives you the opportunity, as other shows, to share some experiences. We like to what we call dialogue, a conversation and critical thinking, something that obviously is up to you, ladies and gentlemen, but the important number is 1-800-848-9222. And for our WABC listeners right in the New York metro area, remember, stay tuned to WABC on Monday, Columbus Day, for live coverage of the parade from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. with WABC personalities with a tent outside the Apple Store on 5th Avenue, along with the WABC trolley. There'll be pizza and Zeppelis there, too, to celebrate amazing day in Italian-American culture. And what, Lawrence? All people from around the world to learn much more about Christopher Columbus. And what we promise, you may not know this, but every show I do, since the basic tenets were about the sky, I promise the audience that sometime during hour number 2, with your okay, sir, we'll do a little sky report, as if I was a magical Columbus. Fairly not. But we'll give people an idea of what they can see in their skies as they move into this deep weekend. Absolutely. So amazing, ladies and gentlemen. Your questions and comments. We love doing this show. And again, I want to thank owner and operator John Catsimatidis and family, and also from the executive staff, Chad Lopez, for giving me the opportunity of a lifetime to sit behind this microphone and share with you the many, many mysteries of the universe. We talk about, if you're a first-time listener or a regular listener, the subjects of astronomy, space, aviation, weather. We get celebrity guests in the mix that you hear many of the promotions that I've had the privilege and honor of knowing and meeting some of these people for so many years, just like many of you out there, to share your experiences here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our helmsman. We like to think of ourselves as this magical starship powered by the incredible signal of this radio station moving out not only across the nation, around the world, but I'm sure out into the cosmos. Stay tuned for hour number 2 on the Dr. Sky Experience.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Hour number 2, ladies and gentlemen, of the Dr. Sky Experience. Our very special guest from hour 1, continuing here in hour 2, Lawrence Bergreen, author of many great books, but in commemoration of Columbus Day Monday and the great navigation skills of this Italian navigator of the ocean, often referred to as the Admiral of the Ocean Sea. The book that Lawrence Bergreen is talking about with us is Columbus, The Four Voyages, 1492 to 1504. Lawrence, welcome back. I appreciate your time this early morning down in Brazil along the beautiful coastal section where the temperatures, are usually pretty moderate when you're near the equator, correct?
Between 65 and 85.
Sounds good to me, my friend. As we promise everybody, Lawrence, in this radio show, we do a short sky update for letting people know what they can actually see as we become explorers of the heavens of our own. Ladies and gentlemen, as we find out, we just passed the beautiful full harvest moon. The moon now returns to its last quarter phase on the 13th, rising around midnight and easily seen high up into the south, just around the time of dawn. Your planets, folks, if you're in the evening sky, looking high up into the southeast at sunset, you'll see Saturn about 800 million miles away from your eye, and then early morning observers get to see the magnificent Jupiter rising around 1 a.m. due east, and then also the planet Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. A comet, among many, are coming closer to the Earth. We find Comet Lemon, which is easily seen with a pair of binoculars just below the bowl of the Big Dipper during early morning hours with hopefully clear skies and less moonlight. And then the last major event as we move into the next weekend on the evening of the 20th and 21st. Look into the east. After midnight, the constellation Orion pours forth meteors from one of the most amazing meteor showers, the Orionids, all debris from Halley's Comet. Thank you, Lawrence, for giving me the chance to explain that to people because they do tell us they appreciate it. But more importantly, we appreciate you. Let's continue to talk about Columbus's voyages. As I'm reading this on the evening of August 3rd, 1492, Columbus departed Palos de la Frontera with 3 ships, the largest, as you described, the Carac, the Santa Maria, and it was captained by Juan de la Cosa under Columbus's direct command. Describe this voyage because what you were talking about before, he knew something about the ocean currents and winds, and boy, if he got inspiration from God, I'm sure, that pushed that little craft across to the others as if they were on an anti-gravity machine, right?
Right. Well, he was, he had done a lot of navigating around in Genoa, and so he was already very experienced as you would guess, call him a merchant marine. Mm-hmm. So he knew his way around ships and currents and sailors, and he had a really great intuitive feel for the currents and the tides, and he could tell by the way the waves looked, by the direction of the wind, how things were the best way to go, and he was able to maximize, that advantage. He also had, he felt that God would guide him in the right way, and he had also, you had mentioned the pilot, his pilots and navigators, and there were a couple of them, were experienced enough to give him some relatively expert advice. At least they weren't going to mislead him, and that was also very helpful. So he was, for a person of his time, very well prepared for this. There was no official training school you could go to. There was no naval academy.
Yes.
But to the extent that you could, teach yourself or learn at a school of hard knocks, or as the equivalent of being merchant marine, he did. So, by general, the general feeling about him was that he was at the top of his trade in this particular profession. And as I mentioned, also he was fearless, and that was also made a huge difference because one miscalculation dashed up on a rock, one big storm, and it was all over. And even though there were two other ships, who knows if he could have gotten to them. By the way, most of these sailors didn't know how to swim, which made it even more perilous.
That's incredible. So they would go overboard, and maybe if in the dark of night, they were never found. That's so sad.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, as I said, the hazards were really extraordinary, and he was, very, very courageous, as were other explorers of that era. Much later for Magellan, the same set of circumstances applied, and others, Vasco da Gama and some others, and they were all up against the same hazards and working with, often knowledge that was perhaps reliable, but perhaps not, and they were, guided by this sense of faith. And also they had their goals, which were often, we would call them commercial, but, somebody else would call them colonial exploitation or something else. So anyway.
You're fearless. I mean, I can't imagine that spirit. And you know what I'd love to hear from, ladies and gentlemen? If you're a sailor out there that has a small boat that doesn't use necessarily diesel or gas-powered motor, I have no knowledge of this. I know Walter Cronkite was a big fan of sailing. We had an interview with him, and he was talking about his passion for sailing. But how about people out there that have had these experiences? And we'd love to hear from you on all these concerns about the magnificence of these early explorers, not just Columbus, but in commemoration of Columbus Day. Obviously, our very special guest, Lawrence Burke Green. One of his many books we're talking about, if you're just joining us right now or tuning in, Columbus, The Four Voyages, 1492 to 1504. The number to get in touch with us to be heard here on Talk Radio 77, WABC, is 1-800-848-9222. Think of it this way, Lawrence. I have no knowledge of sailing. I mean, certainly not. I mean, it'd be something I'd love to learn. But in the practical sense, that's probably not going to happen. But look at these people that take these small boats and they travel around the world. It's extremely perilous. Yeah. And many of them have onboard food supplies. They have flotation devices. They have radios and navigation computers. And some of them don't even make it, right? Sad to say.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
Right. There's a whole genre of sailing alone around the world type books by, I don't know how they do it, really extraordinary, courageous. They have a lot of stamina because they have to, if they fall asleep, that could be fatal, and they just keep going and going. And of course, the loneliness of it would be, in some ways it might be exhilarating or exalting up to a point, but then it could also be, it could drive you mad. It would be terrible.
I can only imagine, and not to scare people, but you bring up a good point. But here's one meteorologically that we could talk about. They had no radar. They knew of no hurricanes and how to avoid them. So, I mean, it was catch as catch can, right? I mean, if there was a hurricane, you could be literally sailing into the eye and then getting all the, the wind speed around it. You're gone. So that's even more about bravery. Or some might say sheer stupidity, but I don't think so. I think that's amazing. That's incredible. In Chapter 4 of your book, you describe here, and it's a literal chapter called The People from the Sky. Is that how the indigenous people might have referred to these settlers or people that have come in from nowhere?
Yes, that's how we think they did. It's a little bit difficult to, suggest or know with accuracy how Columbus or other Europeans appeared to people, Taino and others, who were already in the Americas. So we have to somehow triangulate and, we get a sense of what it might be. And that's, one of the terms, which I think is suggestive and also, somewhat accurate. Again, it's hard to make a literal comparison of, what word concept in one language means in another, but that's my best sense.
Well, you did it well, and you say it well, as you write even, more in detail on this, and that's why we appreciate your scholarly works here, all of these books that we could talk about. But now let's describe this long, risky voyage across the ocean. He's described as the Admiral of the Ocean Sea, a very powerful title. But describe to us on the first mission, because this is interesting for people. Many people may think, as we were told in grammar school and maybe all through our lives, that he discovered America. But the truth is, where did he land, to get specific, Lawrence, on this first mission, so people know exactly where he landed from your scholarly research?
Well, we don't know exactly where he made his first landfall, but it was in the Caribbean, and it was he wasn't sure where he was, but he did think that he was getting very close to China. Why China?
Yes,
because he... the conception of the world was much different. Huge land masses were missing, and he figured if he, by sailing further and further to the west, he would get to the east, and vice versa. And but he never did find these, Asian people who he was looking for, which puzzled him. It's not clear how Columbus adapted to these experiences or observations which did not fit into his preconceptions. I think at some points he thought it and he just wouldn't accept it, so that can't be the case. At other points, he, did, maybe even without half thinking about it, because he had no other choice. And as I said, he was not looking for America, because he didn't know it existed. And that was all way to the north of where he was, and he was that would have come as a shock to him to find all these places named after him, and and also Columbus Day, that would have astounded him. The Columbus Day was not a federal holiday until Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Correct.
And the 1930s. He established it. It had been more of an informal, but an informal holiday for a long time until then. But it was Roosevelt who decided this was going to be a holiday. And because he was, very politically shrewd, he decided this was a good way to win the loyalty of Italian Americans, who were then becoming a larger and larger part of the American population. And so he had two reasons for doing this, at least two. And that's how Columbus Day became there. It's not celebrated around the world. There's no Columbus Day here in Brazil, where I happen to be today.
That's interesting. Many people may get the mistaken identity that's a world holiday. Yeah. And you're so right. But Lawrence, doing some back research on this, I wanted your comment on this, because I don't necessarily believe everything I read on the internet. It states, and I quote, the first celebration of Columbus Day in the United States was in 1892, as President James Buchanan offered up a proclamation, a one-time proclamation. Listen to this, folks. After the lynching of 11 Italian Americans in New Orleans. Now, that to me is so amazing, because it goes back, what? Is that somewhat credible? I mean, from your research, what would you say? Who knows?
It's possible. That's news to me. I thought it was President Benjamin Harrison, who was the first one to celebrate or observe Columbus Day before it was a federal holiday.
Either way,
but
you're our guest.
Is even better, because lynchings of Italians in New Orleans was a problem, more than a problem.
Yeah,
it was horrible, and so it stands to reason. But I can't say for a fact.
Well, this is interesting. If you're leaving on August 3rd, 1492, they didn't have to go through TSA or anything like that. Not to sound silly, but on October 7th, and I'm just reading this as part of what your research tells us, the crew spotted immense flocks of birds. On the 11th of October, Columbus changed the fleet's course due west and sailed through the night, believing land was soon to be found. And that following morning, a lookout on the Pinto, Rodrigo de Triana, he spots land, and obviously then Columbus puts this into his, journal, that on October the 12th, he states, and you continue, you're the scholar on this.
Yes.
So in other words, they land, they see flocks of birds as an indication of land, right?
Yes. And they wonder, I'm exaggerating a little bit, how far to China? Because
amazing.
that's what they, or Asia, because that's what they thought that they were looking for. So this came as a bit of a surprise or a detour for them, and but they made the best of the situation. And as I said, they didn't realize how history would see it and how we would look upon it. But that's what many ironies of exploration history. Last night I was watching the movie First Man about Neil Armstrong.
Yes, you bet, a great one.
He was a great movie, and it's so different because they had a very, very precise idea where they were going. And yes, there were a lot of unknowns, and there was a lot of luck, for want of a better word, involved. But it was really different. The issue of religion was pushed way in the background. It was suggested, but when they landed, there wasn't the sense that they were going to be, people were not going to, overwhelm them. And they knew they had seen exactly where they were going. So a lot of the sense of the unknown was taken out of it, except for the distances. The distance was incredible compared to, unimaginable in Columbus's time, and the speed as well. So, it was a very different feeling, but there was something about the impulse to explore, which I think is just inborn in people, and not necessarily, not just Italians or Americans, but people everywhere. Almost
absolutely.
Everywhere.
You said it so well, because Lawrence, you're right. It's that spirit of exploration, and they're not going to listen to a no. I mean, what if Columbus decided to get shaky arms and legs and said, well, I really don't think I really want to risk myself and my crew. I'm not going to do this. So there's a spirit. Yeah. And you said before, and I keep repeating this, inspiration from God. Now, that's powerful stuff. I mean, not everybody may agree with us on that, but hey, I'm sure open to that possibility, and I do believe it myself, that without this inspiration from God, things like this may not have happened in the way, of course, history is recorded, obviously. Just keep expounding on that, because it's so amazing. I have no idea.
From what he wrote, you get the sense that, sure, yes, Columbus himself was scared. He was terrified, and he thought he would be killed often at any time because he was in the grip of forces that were much larger and more powerful than him. And some of them were forces that were natural, wind, water, waves, and others were his sense of a divine mission that was sending him somewhere. And that was, he was trying to fulfill that destiny. As I said, it's mixed in with some other, less exalted emotions. But there was that sense, and he wasn't the only one by a long shot. But I really thought that makes him, complex and interesting. Before I began this book, I actually never really thought of Columbus as a living, breathing, human being.
Exactly.
And it was just a symbol, just a statue in Columbus Circle in New York City, among other places. But behind that statue was somebody who had a sense of vision. Also, real luck, because a lot of other people were heading off to sail across the ocean blue, and they never were heard of again. They never made it back. They weren't as lucky as Columbus, or they weren't as skillful, and they disappeared. And he was, really exceptional. I think that's why, it's important for history to preserve people like them. We also talk about Indigenous Peoples Day. It's important to talk about people who are also not as well known. However, the difference is those people are pre-literate. In other words, they didn't have written records. It's
correct,
very
precisely.
Hard to know what they did. And with Columbus, one of the things he did was he wrote every darn thing down, and other historians who were around who came shortly afterwards or with him. So we have multiple accounts of what he did, and then shortly thereafter. But pre-literate, some of it is just guesswork and working with legends and oral histories. It's remarkable. It's fascinating, but it's not as precise or useful from a scientific perspective.
And let me also throw out this, Lawrence, to everybody that does want to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, just as all due respect, 600 native nations are in the United States of America alone, with 6.8 million Americans, but that's a small population, which obviously deserves respect. 2% of the nation is, and obviously people can decide how they want to interpret what we're saying here. But again, our emphasis, if you're just joining us, ladies and gentlemen, is more on the science of exploration, the passion of this wisdom that these individuals like Columbus got, and this amazing passion that they had for taking these great risks. And I know we're up against a break here in just a minute, but I wanted to just have a little tease here for you to tell everybody this, because we all learned in school, basically, it was not really complete. Obviously, it was totally incorrect that Columbus discovered the New World, or America, when obviously he thought he was in China or Asia. But talk about Leif Erikson. There's also claims that Leif Erikson was one of the first right around 1000 AD that actually came to Newfoundland and more of what we call North America, correct?
Yes. Now, I am not a Leif Erikson expert.
Understood.
But again, but the records about Leif Erikson are much more scattered and hazy, and we don't know as much about what he did or what he was like and what was going on. We can piece it together indirectly, but we just don't know as much. And when you start thinking about how much we know about history or how far back it goes, when you think about it, it's not that much. It's not that long ago. Well, in some cultures, you do get a sense of more ancient history, but in others, it really is, it's much more recent. So anyway, that's my answer to that question,
Sure.
which is not a really satisfying answer. But
No. It's your opinion, and it's a good one. I appreciate the response here because, like I said, it's not so much about the host in this particular show. It's always about the great guests because that's what makes this thing go and the wheels turn. Again, not to convince anybody out there in Radio Land, the theater of the mind, that to open people's minds on these great mysteries, if I were to sum it up, and you probably do it better, how the heck did people in that particular time even know the shapes of continents? Maps were, of course, made, many not correct, but if you look at some of them, no doubt, and we're not splitting hairs, Lawrence, the shape of Africa and other places around the world were actually somewhat accurate, and they didn't have, telescopes, satellites, or GPS to do it. And the great these great explorers that risked their lives because of this passion that they had, all about the human thing called what? Exploration. That's fascinating. Yeah. So when we come back from the break, I want to get into these other voyages and talk about what happened to the Santa Maria on one of the journeys. It got shipwrecked and not going to return back to the Spanish kingdom. So we'll get to talk all about those things as time goes on. Ladies and gentlemen, you are the reason we're here. 1-800-848-9222. If you've got questions, observations, and what we call dialogue and critical thinking, you're the kind of caller we want. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the story of Christopher Columbus with Lawrence Bergreen, his book, Columbus, The Four Voyages. We'll be right back after these important announcements as we continue with the Dr. Sky Experience.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
You can never cross the ocean unless you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. A quote apropos to our topic of the 2 hours, Christopher Columbus with our special guest, Lawrence Bergreen, his book, Columbus, The Four Voyages. Thank you so much, Lawrence, for being with us. We've got a big board of callers here. Let's say good morning now to Tony in Clifton. Tony, good morning. How are you doing on this early Saturday?
Dr. Sky, Lawrence, thank you guys for taking my call.
Morning.
I want to say that what I read this great article about Christopher Columbus, and it really highlighted not so much his faith, but it highlighted what a student of learning he was, and that his family had a wool store, and it was on the Mediterranean, so he would look at the Mediterranean and think of traveling. And at that time, there was a block from the Ottoman Empire of trading for Italy and Genoa. They weren't allowed to do that. It was a difficult time, and persecution was there. And I thought, how amazing. He studied astronomy, he studied geography, he studied maps, he studied on ships. He really was really like a marvel. He was a very sort of intelligent kind of person, and he wanted to learn everything. And there's records of him, and all that he studied. The astronomy part was amazing. So when I think of him, I think his heart was for discovery. His heart wasn't to make business. From the get-go, he wanted to just explore. So for anyone to say anything negative about him, really it wasn't his nature. You think of how they came to New York City, the East India Company, to make money and trade and do those sort of evil things with slaves. That wasn't his nature. Mm-hmm. You need to know history to know what the difference was. He really was a student, and the astronomy part, Dr. Sky, and geography he studied, and the papers and travels of Marco Polo. What can you add to that? I mean, that's what I read, and I was astonished.
You're right, Tony, and he had no telescope, as Lawrence was saying. Lawrence, you have the floor on this. Go ahead, please.
It's true. He was, and definitely inspired by the travels of Marco Polo, which gives you an idea of how far-ranging his interests are. And keep in mind, I think it ran in the family. His son, Ferdinand, wound up having one of the largest libraries in all of Europe of books. Right. So this was a purely scholarly interest. A lot of it had to do with his father, but a lot of other people. So he was, well, we could say a scholar, explorer, navigator, with a strong sense of religious compulsion, devotion. I'm not sure what the right word is. I've heard different explanations. What really sounds, how they explain Columbus's motivation. But I think a lot of it was also just inborn in his own personality, which makes him an extraordinary individual. He also suffered a lot. In addition to almost going blind from staring at the ocean so much, he broke a lot of bones. He had tremendous internal bleeding from various accidents that he had. By the time of his last voyage at the end, and he washed up on the shore of in Spain, he was half dead, and there really couldn't be any more after that. If he had any strength, he might have gone out to sea again, but he just physically couldn't do it. He was, shattered in body and mind. But he left this incredible legacy. But as I said, it came at a great cost. It was, with a great deal of effort. So anyway, that exploration is
it's incredible. It's totally amazing. And your book, of course, I want to promote. Tony, I want to promote Lawrence's website. It's Lawrence Bergreen Author. It's spelled, his first name is spelled Lawrence is Laurenc. Yeah. Bergreen, Bergreen, and then, of course, it's author.com. That's amazing, Tony. You bring up the subject matter of his astronomical knowledge well before the technology of anything like telescopes. And I want to remind everybody, Tony, of course, you're in the listening area, as many of people are listening. WABC will be there live during the Columbus Day Parade, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., broadcasting with WABC personalities with a tent outside the Apple Store on Fifth Avenue. A great way to celebrate the remarkable achievements as we talk scientifically. The WABC trolley will be there, pizza and Zeppelis. I love Zeppelis. There to commemorate the Italian-American culture and all peoples, right, Tony, who want to remarkably remember this individual and explorer. Tony, you get the last word.
Well, he was from Genoa, and that's half of my background. So he's part of my family.
It is amazing.
Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.
Hey, Tony, thanks for always being part of the Dr. Sky experience. Let's continue, ladies and gentlemen. So many people want to get in on the conversation, and give their opinion. Here we go to Ina in Manhattan. Good morning. You're on with Lawrence Bergreen. How are you doing?
Hello, is that me, Ina?
Yes, it's you. Ina, excuse me.
Hello, Dr. Sky. Nice talking to you. You have a beautiful voice, and you're
you're
very
so sweet.
Good.
Thank you so much.
I'm from Jamaica, and we start the first grade, we start reading about Christopher Columbus until the last grade, and we have play against with his ships, and one of his ships, I think it was the Santa Maria, sink in Jamaica with a lot of goals and stuff. So I love Christopher Columbus, and we learn a lot of things about him. We honor him. We have holiday. He has a holiday to Christopher Columbus Day. It's a holiday in Jamaica, and I even named my grandnephew Christopher.
Wow!
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
What a passion! It's Ina or Ina? Did I get it? What is it?
Ina.
Excuse me. Yes, and I've been once to Jamaica. I enjoyed my time there on a cruise. It was a beautiful time of the year. It was winter, and we enjoyed the culture and all the great food, and I hope to go back. But more important than my trip, Lawrence, you're hearing a woman testify about her respect for Columbus. Please continue.
Yes. He was really a fascinating figure, and I think that, he wins respect in some ways that no other explorer from that era has, not even Magellan, or Da Gama or many others who you can name. And there's something about him that the example, even though there are so many misconceptions about what he did, going back to the fact that he didn't realize that there was no America. He didn't realize that. He never got there, and he thought he was somewhere else. But it's the example of what he did. Also, that he did it with others, that 3 ships the first time, and then more ships with each of the successive voyages, going up to 4. So it really is extraordinary in that respect.
Ina, you get the last word if you're still with us. And again, thank you for testifying about your homeland and stories about Christopher Columbus. Please continue.
Yes, I enjoy all your shows, and you are the professor of education. And
he is, not me, but
thank you for
thank
taking
you.
my call.
No. God bless you, and hope your weekend is as beautiful as you want it to be. And ladies and gentlemen, we certainly appreciate everybody here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Isn't that amazing, Lawrence? I mean, what are we doing here? I mean, it's not so much about the host, it's about people like yourself, and I really mean this. All these great guests that I'm not an author. I mean, I could put a couple of sentences together, but your story, how would you describe yourself? This is interesting. I mean, your passion is what? About exploration is kind of what I get it.
Exploration and discovery. I write narrative history. And biography, more and more narrative history, which is more of a trendy term. I've written some, old-fashioned biographies as well, but I'm mostly interested in a strong narrative and compelling characters. Therefore, I would be less likely to write about a very obscure subject. I wish I could, write about a mathematician. It never happened.
Interesting.
So I'm aware of my limitations as well.
But give us a little tease before we go to the break. You wrote very much an extensive, a story, a biography, as that is, of Casanova. Wow. That to me is
Casanova.
Amazing.
I decided this was more impulsive than some of these others. You could say, if you, in the broader definition of this term, so to speak, that Casanova was an explorer as well. We think of him in a kind of a cartoon version of the Casanova, the Great Lover, et cetera, A Casanova, somebody, who was kind of, earlier precursor of Hugh Hefner or something. The real Casanova was a person of the Enlightenment. He was French and Italian. He was extremely learned, and he wrote an unbelievable amount. I got interested because by accident I came across, I realized that he had donated thousands of pages of papers, or they had come into the French National Library, Bibliothèque Française. They were in French, and they had just become available. They had been kept in, I don't know, a back room or something for a long time. I was almost on the next plane to Paris to go see them in person. Now you can see them, they're, I think, almost all online in facsimile. But in those days, no. So there's something about holding somebody's own manuscript where they wrote in their own hand, in pen and ink.
Oh, you bet. That must be amazing.
Yeah, really compelling. And he wrote about his love life, but he also wrote about all his various experiences with kings and princesses and royalty and his theories about various things. He held nothing back. And I realized Casanova is a much more extraordinary figure than the cartoon, sketch that we know him about. So I went back. Usually, to get a book going, it's a little bit complicated, and you talk to a literary agent, talk to a publisher.
Oh yeah, it must be a long process. Yes.
A long process. But in this case, I said, I think I want to do Casanova. Okay, all right.
and maybe men can learn a little bit about interacting with women from the stories that you have in Casanova. With that,
yes.
Sorry to cut you short there, but Lawrence, we do have our last break of these 2 hours. And again, I'm so grateful for you to being up this early morning. The sun will probably be up by the time we finish here. Just kidding. But I do appreciate you for spending time with us on this great radio station, Talk Radio 77 WABC, from one original New Yorker to another. They can't get any better than this, right? There you go. And on that note, we'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, with more with our special guest, Lawrence Bergreen.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience.
Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
This is incredible, though, but your feelings, Deanna, about Columbus. I mean, it's an interesting subject that we talk about his exploration side. What say you?
Yeah, it's amazing how many different conflations or different versions of the story you hear. But of course, he was beholden to the king and queen of Spain. He was a mercenary for them, All these explorers had to be funded. And they say he gambled. Is that true? He was a gambler?
I didn't know.
Gambler? That I didn't know.
No, I don't know any. I don't know any casinos that are Columbus.
He did his utmost to serve and because he had to report back. And I heard that it was a lot of pressure to please the royalty. Is that true? Yeah.
Certainly, yeah. Oh, for sure, yes. A lot of pressure on him and anybody else who needed royalty for anything. Yes, a great deal of pressure. But when he was off on his voyages, they were miles and miles away. There was no communication back and forth, and he was on his own the entire time.
That's amazing. Yes, Deanna, God bless you. Thank you for your nice compliments. Deanna, thank you so much for your kindness, and I hope time is running short here. And again, I appreciate every one of our callers here. If we don't get to you, ladies and gentlemen, at the top of the hour, we certainly do apologize, but we're trying to do the best I can. Deanna, again, have a great morning, and thanks for being part of the Dr. Sky Experience. Let's say good morning to Robert in Philadelphia. Robert, good morning. You're on with Lawrence Bergreen.
Hi, Dr. Sky, and I won't tease you about sounding like Lou Dobbs, okay? and hello to your wonderful guest, Mr. Bergreen. I'm really appreciating the information you're giving me. And the fact you said that he landed in October 12th, and that means he sailed through hurricane season for this part of the world, so he was doubly lucky in that regard. But I do understand that that King Ferdinand would have loved to have found a trade route to China and India. And it kind of makes sense that Leif Erikson might have made it first because he had the stepping stones of Iceland and the southern tip of Greenland in getting here, and the mid-Atlantic voyages didn't have that luxury. But the reason why I had a question,
yes,
I heard that it was written in his journals that near the end, when he was getting close to the North American continent, although he didn't know it was there, that there were orbs of light spotted in the eastern sky. Is that true, Mr. Bergreen?
Yes. We're not sure what they are, and it may have been meteorites. It may have been, who knows, what kind of other phenomena it was. We don't really know.
Robert, thank you.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. In the interest of time, it occurs to me that if they saw them lights, the people where he landed also saw them lights and might have thought they were a harbinger of them coming, and that's why they assumed they were sky people, not out of ignorance or anything like that.
Well said, Robert. Yeah, that's amazing.
Plausible. Yes, plausible.
Robert, thank you as always. I wish time permitted all the opportunities here go deeper, and hopefully the next time we do have, if he'll agree to do this, Lawrence Bergreen again, to talk more about not only this book, but many others. Let's say good morning if we have some moments of opportunity here. Still, we do, for Jeff in Jersey City. You're on with Lawrence Bergreen. Good morning. How are you there?
Hello, Dr. Sky and Lawrence. I have a quick comment, and time is short. One question. For me, my assessment of Columbus, smart, courageous, wouldn't give up, determined. He also died poor, I understand. But my question, and you can answer that maybe, Lawrence, but also the main question here is, a lot of times linkage between Magellan and Columbus. And I think Columbus is still taught at Annapolis at the Naval Academy, being a great sailor. But you can tell me, did Magellan learn from Columbus? Did he study Columbus? Is that an issue? Did he study or learn anything from Columbus?
Great question, Jeff. Absolutely. Go ahead there, Lawrence. That's amazing.
Yeah, he wanted to go Columbus one better because he wanted to go much further. So he wanted to learn from Columbus's mistakes and his errors and, go much further. And so he did. He also had a much more ambitious fleet that he put together, and was much more, much better equipped. So he, in fact, circumnavigated the world, but he didn't make it all the way through. He died, and then some survivors of this voyage made it back, and about 3 years later, and there were just a handful of them, and when they showed up back in Spain, nobody really, they were surprised to see them because they thought that everybody had been lost and they were dead. And as I said, there was no way to send word back to say, oh, hey, we're in trouble or getting somewhere. So that was remarkable. So piecing together Magellan was kind of like piecing together a skeleton of an animal that had expired. With Columbus, the voyages didn't last as long. It wasn't 3 years long, so you can get it together. And also there were several historians who were on the case almost from the beginning. So you get some observations that were either contemporaneous with Columbus or shortly afterward.
Amazing. Jeff, I wish time permitted, but thank you. I hope you'll continue to be part of our Dr. Sky experience with your questions and your comments. I probably saved the best for last. I know no time will do it because it's almost the end of the show. But Columbus and astronomy, the total lunar eclipse of February 29, 1504. Allegedly, if I'm correct, he was in Jamaica. He wasn't getting what he wanted, so he knew that there would be an eclipse. And boy, did that change the minds and the hearts of those. Amazing. Whether it's right or wrong, but there you go.
No, it's a true story. He predicted that this lunar eclipse would be coming because he knew enough about it. He was sophisticated enough, and he told the people there who were getting really tired of sharing the island with him that it was coming, and if they didn't behave, the moon would turn red, and that would foretell, a great, divine or supernatural destruction visited upon them. Well, and then sure enough, it happened. And after that, they decided that Columbus really did have magical powers, and, the threats went away. So he managed to. Now, he knew the whole time, what would happen. So he managed to. That was a good one. You know what I mean?
And even to predict eclipses, that comes with great skill, not him himself.
Yes.
But knowing that he's on the other side of the world, and he took a big risk, even though it may not be morally right, but that's another story unto itself.
Well, on the other hand, it also meant that he was able to win that particular struggle without a shot being fired.
Yeah, there you go. So there's some positivity.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Lawrence, I can't thank you enough. You're down there, how do we say it, Fortaleza, Brazil, along the Atlantic coast. Fortaleza, excuse me. And also, ladies and gentlemen, something we talked about off air very quickly. During the days of the great Graf Zeppelin, the big German airships, the LZ-129 and LZ-127, the Hindenburg and the Graf, we talked about this. It made a stop after traveling from Germany in Recife, kind of south of where you are. That's amazing. And that happened on May 22nd, 1930. Also, the great explorers over the ocean, Dr. Hugo Echner and the great Graf Zeppelin and Hindenburg. Lots of stories to talk about. But I thank you, Lawrence, for being up with us, and I hope when you return to New York, may we do this again on some of your other books? I'm always interested.
Absolutely.
You're awesome, my friend.
Great.
His website, LawrenceBergreen.author.com, and the Lawrence is spelled Laurence. Lawrence, blessings to you and your family, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sky. Thank you.
Always a privilege and honor. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We wrap it up here. Tomorrow, as we move through time and space, other phenomenal guests, as you folks tell us, not so much about the host, but always about the great guest. Midnight as we go into Sunday morning, midnight Saturday into 2 a.m. Sunday morning, Eastern Daylight Time. And it's so amazing, ladies and gentlemen. If you have questions or comments, by all means, email me at drsky, Dr. Sky, at wabcradio.com. And as I mentioned often, and proud to say it, you can listen not only to this particular program, the Dr. Sky Experience, in the form of podcasts, but what about all the other great hosts that are here on Talk Radio 77, WABC. And we always say a thank you to our helmsman, and what an appropriate way, right? As we talk about the navigation of Columbus over the ocean, we thank our special helmsman as we talk to Theater of the Mind Radio in our magical starship, both Tony and Bill. And don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, coming up early on Columbus Day, WABC one more time proudly on Columbus Day. We live coverage of the parade from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. with WABC personalities with a tent outside the Apple Store on 5th Avenue, along with the WABC trolley pizza, Zeppelis, there to celebrate Italian-American culture and the cultures around the world. We now pass the torch of knowledge and dialogue to TJ McCormick for the other side of midnight. Blessings to you. And we'll talk tomorrow on these great topics.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Sky Experience. You can hear the Dr. Sky Experience Saturday mornings, midnight to 2 a.m. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social, on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
The following is a paid political announcement.
Lifelong Democrat Diana Florence served for 25 years as a Manhattan prosecutor under DA Robert Morgenthau. She put criminals away, stood up for victims, and protected our streets. Now, Diana is challenging failed Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg as an independent because it's time for a DA who fights for our families, not criminals. That's why Diana has won the support of organized labor like the steamfitters, plumbers, and ironworkers, everyday New Yorkers who want a DA they can trust. Manhattan needs a DA who will do the job, prosecute crime. That's Diana Florence. Under Alvin Bragg, crime is up and prosecutions are down. Bragg doesn't prosecute crime. He plays partisan politics. Bragg failed to protect women and failed to protect workers. As a prosecutor, Diana Florence won groundbreaking convictions, fighting against corruption, domestic violence, wage left, and daily working conditions. She's always been a partner of unions, community groups, and to cops like us. For Manhattan District Attorney, vote for Diana Florence. Diana for DA.com. Paid for by Diana for Manhattan DA.